Even if you've got the best shed in the world, it's not going to be necessarily absolutely perfect. To me, this shed looks lovely. It looks like it's a really, really good setup, but not everybody has a shed like this. And even in this shed, you can see the calf rearer here is bucketing milk. In an ideal world, we'd have a nice pipeline underneath over to the shed, from one shed to your calves, and a little petrol pump dispenser sort of thing, putting it into the calf feeders. So even this fabulous one is not ideal, perfect, all singing, all dancing. What we're more likely to see are things like this. So my little weather vane in the corner there showing that there's prevailing weather coming into the shed. It's a very nice, airy, light calf shed. So the animals are getting a lot of airflow and air exchange. But unfortunately, there's also the possibility of the calves getting wet and getting the wind affecting them. Calves aren't going to get cold if it's just temperature. Calves will get cold if they get wet and they're in the wind. So as long as we can keep them out of the wind, that's a really good thing for us to be doing. A calf shed, ideally, and we do not live in an ideal world, should be twice as long as it is wide or high, because we want to make sure that there's somewhere in the shed for the calves to get away from the weather. With this one, we could have a look at putting plywood on the front of the gates, or canvas or shade cloth, or anything like that that reduces the airflow directly where the calves are. We could also put some canvas from the top as well, so you've minimised the amount of wind that can come into the shed and the amount of rain it can blow in as well. But we also need to bear in mind that if we reduce it too far, then we've got no airflow. And that's the sort of thing that we saw in this shed. This is Kate's shed, which may not look the most ideal shed to people sitting here, but it's a good example of how you can make adjustments to what you've got. Massey University has a shed this sort of size for their calf rearing trials. It's a demonstration unit for housed cows. It's a very, very fancy shed on that side, but the calf bit is just one piece put off the end. And all they've had to do is basically what we've just been talking about. Make sure that there's no drafts coming to the calves, make sure that there's a really good airflow above the calves, and they've got a concrete block wall around the outside and then shade cloth to prevent the weather coming in, and then gaps at the top so that the air can circulate through. The big thing to remember in an ideal world, of course, it depends on how many animals you've got coming through, how many separate pens you've got. An ideal is to have 10 to 12 calves with a 1.5 metre square area for each of those calves. But again, it depends on what your setup is. And the reason for doing that, or the reason for suggesting that, is because it makes it much easier to check if some of those calves are not drinking and get onto it much earlier, and also to have a look if there's any issues with disease or illness and get onto them very quickly. When we're putting calves into pens, some people will put the first group in, and then as the new lot of calves come in, they'll move that first group into the second pen and move them along until they're in the last pen and they're leaving. That's really helpful for trying to work out what age things are that are there, and also to make sure that if you're not the calf rearer but you've got other workers on the farm with you, everybody knows who's drinking and who's sorted and what age everything is. But what also happens at that point is that we can transfer disease along the pens of calves. If we put the first lot in the first pen and keep moving those down, by the time we've got the fifth group of calves into the first pen, there's also 5 lots of disease build-up in there. So if you can put them in the first pen and leave them there until they come out and run an all-in, all-out system, that's really useful. That means you get the reduction in disease transfer, but you can also use different markers. Some people this week, they've been spraying them on the head with different colours dependent on what age they are they drinking, everything like that, or just Velcro tabs or ear tags hanging from the gateways with notes on or numbers so that people know which group they are.